There comes a quiet turning point in a human life that rarely gets named. It is the moment when silence starts to feel more honest than most conversations. You notice it in small ways at first. The room is finally empty, the phone is face down, and instead of feeling lonely, you feel relieved. Your shoulders drop. Your breath deepens. The air, without anyone's words in it, feels strangely kind to you. From the outside, it might look like withdrawal. People say, "You've changed," as if something in you has gone missing. But you know it is not an absence, it is a return. I remember when it began for me. I would sit in a cafe and hear the rise and fall of voices, the rehearsed stories, the automatic laughter, and something inside me simply stepped back. Not in judgment, but in clarity. I saw how much of what we call connection is just noise we are afraid to live without. And you, perhaps, are starting to feel that too. You start to notice that something in you is no longer hungry for what it used to chase. There was a time when any invitation, any conversation, any gathering felt like proof that you belonged. Now you sit in the same rooms, with the same people, hearing the same stories, and a very quiet part of you whispers, "I am not really here with them anymore." Silence begins to follow you like a soft, patient companion. You drive without the radio on, and the road feels more honest. You wash the dishes in the evening, and the sound of water is enough. You lie awake at night, and instead of reaching for another voice, you let your own breathing be the only conversation. To someone watching from the outside, it can look like you are fading out of life. They see fewer messages from you, fewer appearances, fewer updates. They may call it isolation, moodiness, or burnout. You may start to call it that too because you have been trained to believe that a full life must always be full of people and words. I remember arguing with myself in those early days. Part of me insisted that I should go out more, talk more, stay visible, keep performing the version of me that everyone recognized. Another part, more ancient and less noisy, simply wanted to sit in a chair by the window and let the sunlight speak instead. Here is the strange truth that few people talk about. When your awareness deepens, your nervous system grows tired of pretending. It no longer wants to participate in conversations that drain you, roles that no longer fit, or performances that keep you far from your own center. If you feel a quiet pull toward fewer words and more presence, it is not necessarily a sign that you are breaking. It might be the first sign that something inside you is finally beginning to heal. And if that feels confusing, be gentle with yourself. You are learning a new language, one without noise or decoration, where reality speaks in breath, in pauses, in the subtle way your body finally loosens when no one is asking anything of you. Of course, when this shift begins, the mind does not greet it with gratitude. It greets it with fear. You may look at yourself and think, "What is wrong with me?" Once, you could talk for hours. Now you feel tired after 10 minutes of small talk. Once, you feared missing out. Now you fear being dragged back into what no longer feels true. The culture you live in does not help. It worships visibility, noise, constant sharing. If you are not posting, attending, replying, performing, it quietly suggests that you are falling behind, that you are disappearing. So when you choose a quiet evening over another loud night, a part of you whispers, "Maybe I'm becoming cold, maybe I'm shutting down." I remember sitting with that exact fear. Friends would ask, "Are you okay? You seem distant lately." How could I explain that I wasn't distant? I was simply less interested in pretending? That I was no longer willing to trade my inner peace for the comfort of familiar noise? From the outside, a person who chooses silence can be mistaken for someone who has given up. But often the opposite is true. Sometimes the one who grows quiet has simply stopped arguing with reality, stopped forcing themselves into conversations that betray their own nervous system. You might notice guilt creeping in. Guilt for not picking up every call. Guilt for leaving messages unanswered a little longer. Guilt for choosing a walk alone instead of another round of performative laughter. If that is happening in you, recognize it for what it is. A collision between your old conditioning and your new clarity. You were taught that a good person is always available, always responsive, always socially smooth. But there comes a time when the soul cares less about being good and more about being real. So if you feel this tension, do not rush to label yourself as broken, antisocial, or failing at life. You are standing at a threshold, and the old language you used for yourself no longer fits. There is a question that eventually rises out of all this confusion, like a small lantern in a dark room. What if nothing is wrong with me? The mind resists that. It prefers diagnoses, labels, familiar stories. I'm getting boring. I'm losing my social skills. I'm shutting down emotionally. But somewhere beneath those conclusions, a quieter possibility waits for you to notice it. What if silence feels better now, not because you are collapsing, but because you are finally outgrowing noise that never truly fed you? From the outside, this is rarely understood. People tend to measure aliveness by how much someone talks, how often they show up, how loudly they laugh. No one has taught them how to recognize a different kind of aliveness, the one that glows from the inside, calmly, without asking to be seen. I had to learn this the hard way. I used to force myself back into circles that no longer felt like home, just to prove to myself that I was still normal. I would come back exhausted, more empty than before, and then criticize myself for not enjoying what I was supposed to enjoy. It was only when I stopped fighting the pull toward quiet that I began to understand. My soul was not retreating, it was refining. You might be in that same refinement now. The conversations that once thrilled you feel thin because you can finally sense what they are covering up. The constant updates and opinions tire you because your system is no longer willing to swim in surfaces. This is not you going backwards. This is you turning inward, toward a center that has always been there, but was drowned out by commentary. So instead of asking, "Why can't I be like before?" try asking, "What part of me is waking up now that wasn't awake back then?" That single shift in question changes everything. You move from self-judgment to self-discovery, from suspecting a flaw to sensing a threshold. And at that threshold, silence is not an enemy. It is the doorway. If silence is the doorway, then what exactly are you stepping out of when you walk through it? On the surface, it seems simple. Fewer words, fewer people, fewer events. But underneath, something far more intricate is happening. For most of your life, your nervous system has been trained to live in survival mode inside relationships and conversations. You learned to laugh when you weren't amused, to agree when you weren't aligned, to stay when every cell in you wanted to leave. Words became a kind of armor, a costume your ego wore to keep you accepted, safe, predictable. When awareness starts to deepen, that armor grows heavy. Silence feels comforting now because your system is finally allowed to stop performing. In the quiet, your body is no longer scanning every face, every tone, every micro-expression for danger or disapproval. It can rest, it can soften, it can return from the role to the raw fact of being alive. I remember realizing this one evening, sitting alone in my kitchen. No music, no messages, no background noise. Just the hum of the refrigerator, the dim light over the sink, and the simple rhythm of my own breathing. And I felt something almost shocking. Nothing in me was negotiating anymore. No part of me was trying to impress, explain, defend, or convince. I was just there, and that just was vast. What you may call wanting to be alone is often your nervous system asking for a chance to recalibrate to truth. Ego thrives on story, on repetition, on hearing itself echoed back through others. But the deeper self you are growing into does not need that constant confirmation. It cares less about how it appears and more about whether it is aligned. So your attraction to silence is not random. It is a natural response to outgrowing the environments where you had to compress yourself. When you stop filling every gap with conversation, what remains is signal instead of noise. The subtle knowings, the buried griefs, the quiet joys, the simple yes and no that were always there, waiting for you to finally hear them. There is an image that often comes to me when I talk about this shift into silence. It is the image of a crowded marketplace and a quiet temple that exists inside the same person. For years, most of your energy belonged to the marketplace. You moved through conversations like stalls filled with noise, opinions here, gossip there, shared complaints, recycled stories. You learned how to bargain for approval, how to trade pieces of yourself for belonging. It was loud, it was distracting, and in a strange way it felt like life. But somewhere inside you, there was always a small, hidden temple. A place without neon signs or loud music. No one clapping, no one watching, no one asking you to be entertaining. Only a simple space, quiet and undecorated, where you could sit with what is real in you. Most people never visit that inner temple on purpose. They only stumble into it when life collapses, when loss or illness or heartbreak breaks the walls of the marketplace. Then, for a brief moment, they taste the stillness that has been there all along, before rushing back out into the noise again. What is happening to you now is different. You are not being dragged into silence by disaster. You are being invited into it by awareness. You begin to step out of the marketplace not because you hate people, but because you finally see the price you have been paying to stay there. You notice how much of your speech was a mask. You notice how often you abandoned your own knowing just to keep the conversation smooth. So you start visiting the inner temple more. A few minutes of quiet in the morning, 10 slow breaths before you reply, a walk without your phone, an evening where you let the world move on without your constant participation. From the outside, it may look like you are doing nothing, but inside, something very real is happening. The nervous system is relearning safety. The heart is relearning honesty. The mind is relearning how to listen instead of perform. I can tell you from experience, the more time you spend in that inner temple, the less desperate you become for the marketplace to validate you. You do not stop loving people. You simply stop needing every interaction to prove that you exist. And here is the quiet miracle. When you return to conversation from this place, you speak less, but what you say carries more weight. You listen more, but you are less exhausted because you are no longer listening against yourself. Silence has begun to do its work in you. It is not erasing you. It is refining your presence. At some point, if you follow this path honestly, another question appears. How do you live in a noisy world once you have learned to trust your own quiet? This is where many people get stuck. They think there are only two options. Either they go back to the old way, forcing themselves into constant conversation, or they disappear completely, cutting off from everyone. But there is a third way, and it begins in how you relate to your own silence. First, you stop apologizing for it. You stop treating your need for quiet as a flaw to be fixed. When you choose to stay home, to rest, to listen inwardly instead of saying yes to every invitation, you recognize that as an act of honesty, not a failure of courage. Second, you begin to notice which connections survive the silence. There are people who only know how to meet you in noise, in constant movement, in shared distraction. They may fall away, or complain, or try to pull you back into the old rhythm. And then there are those rare ones who can sit with you in a room where not much is said, and still feel close. Those are the ones your soul can breathe around. I remember realizing that my closest relationships were not the ones with the most messages, but the ones where I could be fully myself, even in wordless spaces. No performance, no pressure to entertain, no need to fill every pause. Just a simple companionship that did not fear the sound of its own breathing. For you, this might look like very small practices. Letting a conversation lapse without panicking. Allowing yourself to say, I do not have much to say today, but I like being here with you. Choosing quality of presence over quantity of words. You begin to discover that silence is not the opposite of connection. It is a different kind of connection, one that runs deeper than exchange and approval. So if you find yourself in this season where silence is more comforting than conversation, treat it with respect. Listen to what it is trying to show you about your old patterns, your true needs, your real pace. You are not disappearing. You are rearranging your life around what is real in you. One day you will look back and see that this was not a collapse, but a rerouting. You did not lose your voice. You simply stopped using it against yourself and let silence teach you how to speak from a truer place.